The story of Anduin's life in one video. That's today's challenge. Listen on and you'll understand all that you need to know for World Soul Saga, and you'll catch up on anything you've missed. So, this is Anduin's story. Anduin was born into an era of hope. Stormwind had just been rebuilt. The Wrynn line was squarely on the throne. And Varian's son was heir to all this promise, the honor, the legacy of this kingdom, so much so that he was named after Stormwind's greatest hero, Anduin Lothar. But tragedy struck early in his life when the Stonemasons Guild, having recently not been paid for the repair of Stormwind following the wars, sparked a riot. Tiffin, Anduin's mother, beloved by the people, went before the rioters, trying to plead for a solution. She was hit in the head with a stone. She died. Varian's response was a cavalry charge on the rioters. And that day, the Defias Brotherhood was born. And of course, today's sponsor. Squarespace.com/Bellular Gaming. They love shipping new features, and there's two that combine perfectly that I think you should know about. Blueprint basically creates a custom template for you, where you basically, rather than picking a full template, you get a guided experience through all the core sections you might want in your website. You get to select what things you like. From there, you can easily add more pages to your site, select a color palette from all their fantastic presets, and then tie it all together with a great font. So essentially by the end, you'll have your own custom Squarespace template that looks great and does exactly what you want. Then all you need to do is add your content, and that is where their other recent product launch, Fluid Engine, comes in, where of course the web can be hard. Often that means you can't lay out your website the way that you expect, right? Maybe if you're used to Photoshop and other apps. Fluid Engine is great for solving that problem. You can see it here, where once I upgrade to the content block, I can just lay out these elements with so much more flexibility, right? In a way that of course is mobile responsive. This is a killer feature that, combined with Blueprint, just offers a real unparalleled, easy to use site building experience that all works with, of course, their e-commerce, all the different fonts and things they support. You can do memberships, mailing list, all of that, and you can get started for free today with my link down below, and then you can send your site live after you've built it for free with code Bellular Gaming for 10% off the annual plan. That's squarespace.com/Bellular Gaming. The first time we interacted with Anduin as players, he stood beside Bolvar and Katrana Prestor in Stormwind Keep. Anduin held power, but he was only a child. By this point in the timeline, Anduin Wrynn had actually disappeared. All they knew is he went to a peace summit with the Horde and he didn't come back. And painfully, Anduin's childlike hope is the very thing that inspired Varian to give Thrall's new Horde a chance. Unbeknownst to Anduin and others, there was in fact a snake at court. Katrana Prestor was not a noble. She was actually the Black Dragon Onyxia, and along with Nefarian, she planned to take over the kingdom. It was, in fact, her who had stopped payments to the stonemasons, her who sparked the riots, who's even to say she didn't guide the hand that killed Tiffin Wrynn. Onyxia's goal at this stage was to sow chaos and weaken the throne. Her next step in this plan was the kidnapping of Anduin Wrynn on his way to those peace talks. These acts would of course elevate Anduin to being the king, make Bolvar the regent, and allow her to get more control. Now the story of Anduin Wrynn is truly massive. Today though, we're focusing on Anduin's perspective, because in those early years it was him, Bolvar, Katrana, and essentially court life. Now, of course, over in Kalimdor, a gladiator going by Logosh had made a name for himself. Not that, of course, this would help our alliance cast much now. As it stood, Anduin lost his father, the kingdom was beginning to fray, its social fabric and institutions eroded by a black dragon plot. One day, just like that, Varian returned to Stormwind. The story provided was that the crown paid a massive ransom. In reality, that ransom went straight to Katrana. More resources that she could use to undermine the kingdom. Something, though, was amiss. This Varian was different. He was vain, arrogant, loose with coin, loyal to Katrana Prestor. Anduin hated this new version of his father, begged him to change, to actually help the people, but he wouldn't. Little did Anduin know, the man in front of him wasn't the full Varian. In fact, after the kidnapping over in Kalimdor, botched magic had divided him into two. This man was a shade of Varian, one whose soul was sundered between everything noble, vicious, and uncontrollable, and everything weak, vain, and easy to manipulate. The noble, vicious, uncontrollable Varian went on to become Logosh, the gladiator. The other one, the worst of Varian, that is the man who returned home to be controlled by Onyxia. Anduin knew something was wrong, but he was helpless. What could a child do? How would he even be believed? By now, the kingdom's degradation was hastening. Things looked bad. However, one day, another strange man named Logosh, styled after the wild god Goldorin, appeared. A man forged in the gladiatorial pits of Kalimdor, now reunited with his memories and ready to reclaim his kingdom. Logosh was Varian Wrynn. He revealed Katrana for the black dragon that she was, slew her guards, and forced her to flee. But at a very last moment, she kidnapped Anduin and flew him to her lair. Anduin did prove to be surprisingly wily for a young noble, immediately breaking free and hiding around the lair waiting for help. Help that would come in the form of both halves of Varian fighting side by side to free him. And whenever Logosh was seemingly about to be killed by a magical blow, the other Varian stepped in to take the blow. Logosh did not want him to and tried to save him. This led to both of them being hit, and Onyxia's magic backfiring, reuniting the two Varians, merging each copy's sword to form Shalamayne, of course the sword that Anduin wields today. And with that, Anduin had his father back. With both sides reformed, you would think he would be at ease, but he was in fact not. This new Varian was also disappointing to him. Fierce, brutal, warlike, which of course makes sense. Think about the Logosh side of his personality. Of course, like many young boys trying to step out of their father's shadow, the young Anduin defined himself as his father's opposite. Where Varian fought and brought war, Anduin made amends and fostered peace. With the return of Varian and the re-emergence of the Lich King, Bolvar and Varian left to fight in Northrend. Bolvar did not return. Of course, believing him dead, Anduin was devastated. Of course, Bolvar had kept Anduin right in Varian's absence, had been somewhat of a father figure throughout those years. By now, though, a somewhat older Anduin was beginning to understand his father Varian, that he wasn't an evil man, that he did what he did for reasons that he deeply felt were right. Varian in turn began to understand Anduin more, making him a diplomat for the kingdom and sending him to Ironforge. But secretly, Varian somewhat hoped that the dwarves would put some iron into the young boy. But in reality, this is where Anduin's long career of making friends and brokering peace would begin. He grew close to Magni Bronzebeard. He was even there the day Magni was turned into a stone in an old earthen ritual. But the most important event was Anduin's first contact with the light. It was just a feeling at first, but he felt that destiny was calling him, and he thought that destiny was to be a priest of the holy light. Now, with Magni being a gemstone, Moira Thessarian, leader of the Dark Iron Dwarves, took over Ironforge. She pressed her son's rightful claim as emperor. In a power play, she took Anduin hostage, a move that enraged Varian so much that he broke into Ironforge through the deep-run tram and put a blade to Moira's throat. Even as hostage, Anduin begged for peace, defended Moira, and pleaded that technically she was right and that Varian, human king, really had no right to do any of this. And the sides backed down. Compromise ended up saving that day, and the Council of the Three Hammers, the ruling body of the dwarves to this very day, was formed. And this is our first big example of Anduin helping to broker a peace. Anduin quickly became a diplomatic asset for Stormwind, and as the cataclysm drew nearer, Varian was forging the alliance into a unified military. The final component force to be folded into the new order were the Kaldori and their new allies, the Draenei. A summit was called in Darnassus, and Anduin got to walk amongst Azeroth's greatest. There, he found the prophet Velen, who stood in stark contrast to his father. Here was a man with ancient wisdom and a deep connection to the light. By the end of the summit, Anduin refused to return to Stormwind. He instead stayed with Velen to study the light. Anduin spoke with the Naru in the Exodar and was even visited by them in his dreams. They told him that each life was a universe to protect, and that became his belief, that life should be preserved at all costs. It will take some time, but that idealism would eventually be beaten and reforged into a different take on the character of Anduin. Still, even for Anduin, Velen was too far-sighted. In the face of Deathwing and the many problems that faced Azeroth right now, all Velen could do was think about the Burning Legion. So, Anduin took what he could from the Prophet and returned to Stormwind. Varian would continually push his son, eventually sending him to the Twilight Highlands, where Anduin revealed a Twilight's Hammer Spiring operating in Stormwind. It was no surprise overall to see Anduin in places like war councils by the time that Garrosh was given command of the Horde. Of course, this faction war had been declared in Undercity after Putris's betrayal at the Wrathgate, but it didn't truly begin until things properly broke down. Where this war truly began, though, was the Horde blockading the Night Elven coasts of Kalimdor. But the ultimate blow in that war would be the bombing of Theramore. After that, Jaina came to Stormwind. She demanded that the Alliance wipe all orcs from the planet. Anduin, of course, argued against her. Even Varian did. She called Anduin a gullible child. But this led Anduin and Varian to understand something. Number one, they agreed. Number two, with Jaina they saw that even the very best could be twisted by pain. And as this war blossomed, Anduin's diplomatic mission was run aground on Pandaria, where he quickly got himself lost, learning about the local culture. Pandaria is where we began our hunt for the White Pawn, SI7's codename for Anduin, and it's where players would start to meet and interact with the character a lot more. He met Wrynn Whitepaw immersing himself in Jade Forest life. He'd gotten so involved that we had to take a dream brew just to find him. SI7 demanded Anduin return to Stormwind, but Anduin was his own man now. Mind-controlling the SI7 agents with his priestly powers, he made his move, giving them the slip, determined to study the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, for he felt his destiny lay in these new lands. Anduin's journey wouldn't be easy. He was taken by Nazgrim, he fought the Shah, studied at the Temple of the Red Crane, he brought the factions together to meet the August Celestials. Work he soon felt was rather doomed with the arrival of Varian and the Alliance war fleet on Pandaria, because with patch 5.1, it was full war. And as that war escalated, the Shah thrived and Pandaria worsened. Anduin warns his father of this, that the Shah feed off anger and hate, but for Varian, it was a different situation, telling Anduin he fought out of love for what was right, not out of hate. And while the Shah may have struggled to see that in all of his troops, and perhaps Anduin didn't fully understand his father, this was a lesson about the man that he would learn. Soon after the war escalated, the Divine Bell enters the story. This ancient artifact was very important to Pandaria, but for Anduin it would be a chance for heroism. After a long storyline involving Jaina purging Dalaran, and honestly, a bit of a political thriller going on, the showdown happened. Garrosh was right about to ring the bell, which would have unleashed a Shah calamity. Anduin pleaded with him, tried as hard as he could, but failed. Seeing no other option, Anduin stepped in front of the war chief and begged for an end to the madness. Striking the bell with the harmonic mallet, he managed to turn the chaos of Garrosh into pure harmony. While Garrosh's plan had been thwarted, Garrosh didn't take the point. He crashed the bell down on Anduin, crushing him and fully believing it a killing blow, letting us live so that we could go and tell Varian that his son was dead. Garrosh, of course, wanted Varian to get angry, wanted him to start being rash and make mistakes. Anduin, as we know, survived. He spent time in the Tavern of the Mists healing his wounds, where he would strike up a friendship with Rathian, a mysterious, arrogant young black dragon fresh in the scene with strong opinions about where the world should go. And despite being very different, the two did form that friendship. They were both smart, they both held long conversations, chewed the fat, they got to know each other. And through our time with Rathian, we would learn a lot. We would see him eat the heart of Lei Shen, absorb a fragment of Aman'Thul, and even alert us to the final Titan, Azeroth. To him, as a black dragon, all that mattered was saving the world. Unfortunately for us, he was rather extreme, and Anduin would prove useful to his plan. The Alliance won a decisive victory at the Siege of Orgrimmar. In the throne room, as Varian stared down the Horde leadership, he had a chance to end them. Anduin went to his side, begging for the Horde's life. Varian said he was going to do what a king must. Pragmatists may have argued to dismantle the Horde, but ultimately what we saw is a Varian who had learned from his son. This peace would, broadly speaking, last. It only broke down at the end of the Legion, but of course, by the end of the Legion, the Horde had a different war chief with different goals. Clearly, our story is that Anduin rounded out his father's warlike edges, whilst in turn, Anduin himself developed a will to fight. Garrosh, of course, was made to stand trial for his crimes, and as one of his victims, Anduin took the stand. When questioned, Anduin admitted he thought Garrosh could change, but that's not the only mistake he would make that day. He also invited Wrathion to the trial, and it was Wrathion who broke Garrosh out of chains, split the timelines, and sent him to Draenor to kick off the Iron Horde. Anduin never made it to Draenor. He didn't take part in that, but he was at the forefront of Alliance diplomacy against the Legion's return. He didn't go to the Broken Shore either, rather he nervously waited to hear from Varian who, along with Sylvanas, was charging headlong into a suicidal attempt to stop the Legion. Varian died to Felguard's spears and Gul'dan's magic. Anduin now was not only King of Stormwind, he was also High King of the Alliance. The amount of responsibility on his shoulders was absurd. Faction war was not the immediate concern, but with Sargeras' defeat and the emergence of Azerite, everything changed. The destructive potential of this new material spurred on fears the other side would weaponize it, thrusting the world into a situation that soon would spark into all-out war. A war that, largely told via command table text, was described as one of Azeroth's most brutal. No matter what Anduin did during this time, people died. His decisions had consequences. Send a fleet to Lordaeron and the Horde can get Zandalar. Tell Tyrande to have caution, get Teldrassil burnt down. Many decisions he would make, counsel he would give, would feel right at the time, but would only lead to death. A tug of war was reflected in his advisors. Velen, who taught him about the light, but was perhaps too far-sighted and cautious, and Genn, who was a warlord turned worgen with anger issues. Those old men had some influence. Anduin, though, had his own way, and throughout the war, he used his knack for connection to bring peace. The one thing was very clear. To him, Sylvanas felt a lost cause. From Anduin's perspective, for no reason, at what should have been a simple peace summit to reunite human and Forsaken families, split by Arthas' actions, she went ballistic and caused a slaughter. By the time we see the battle for Lordaeron, he's a resolved man. Someone who is comfortable in their armor and their crown, or at the very least, wears them, aided by a sense of purpose. This is an Anduin ready to fight the war because at this stage he knows Sylvanas is evil. He knows he needs to do what is right. And that is when he met Saurfang. They were worlds apart. Varrock was a veteran from Draenor. He drank the blood of Manaroth. Yet, Varian still told his son that Varrock Saurfang represented the best of the Horde. Varrock at this stage only wanted a noble death at the hands of the Alliance, but instead Anduin imprisoned him. It took time, but he broke through the old orc. And when Anduin secured that bond, he set Saurfang free, making sure Matthias Shaw changed patrol paths and got guards drunk so that Varrock could make the slip, escape Stormwind, and return to the Horde a hero. The pair went on to lead a rebellion against Sylvanas that freed the Horde. Anduin reached across decades of hatred and inspired Saurfang to do what was right, rather than just what he was honor and duty bound to do. Saurfang sacrificed himself ultimately to show the Horde how hollow Sylvanas was, and Anduin carried his corpse into Orgrimmar along with Rokan, Thrall, and the best of what it meant to be the Horde, in a way all brought together by Anduin. Anduin took hard lessons from the war. As an example, sometimes that violence is necessary. But with that came an obsession with Sylvanas from the Alliance. Obviously, many wanted her to face justice. Anduin had some opportunities, but he thought that she could change. She eventually fled to Northrend. Anduin chased her. His faith in the light may be put to the side. Some void was even used by Alliance forces to torture innocent orcs for information. At the end of a novel, we even see Anduin have a flicker of void energy, where otherwise you would have expected light from the young king priest. He bent the Alliance's military into finding her. But while this was happening, Anduin was losing himself. Of course, Sylvanas would not be found. She made her way to Bolvar, she defeated the Lich King, she shattered the helm, and quite soon after, Anduin and others were kidnapped. He was taken from where he thought he was safe, in his own city at Lion's Rest, right by his own father's grave. He was taken to Torghast and put in shackles. Sylvanas, in her own way, was obsessed with Anduin as well. As it turns out, Anduin quite resembled her younger deceased brother. But if she could break this idealistic young king, then Azeroth could be hers, so she thought. But as much as she wanted that, something inside her knew Anduin's light represented a hope she was not allowed to have. And this is something she kind of hated. Maybe she wanted to snuff it out. Maybe she wanted to steal it. But what she didn't want was the jailer to just control Anduin with domination magic. She actually thought she was right, and she wanted to win him to her side. Of course, the jailer, a strange god creature who doesn't care about mortal emotions, just dominated him, controlled him, gave him a Mournblade, put him into rune armor that bound his body and sent him out to do his bidding. Anduin's soul was torn. Everything good about him was taken from the jailer, suppressed. The only thing that remained was the cold thrill of the domination magic. He was made to do horrible things, but he was inside the whole time. Imagine a nightmare that feels completely real, that you cannot wake up from. And then imagine yourself doing horrible, unspeakable things in that nightmare, being horrified, disgusted at what you've done, but actually feeling a sense of power from it, and a little bit of you liking that power. That is what happened to Anduin, and that completely destroyed his confidence and his self-perception. Of course, we would free Anduin. Sylvanas was free, she had her trial, she was banished to the Maw. But before leaving the Shadowlands, Anduin met her one last time. Even after everything that was done to him, the trauma fresh in his mind, he did something that only Anduin could do. He empathized with her position. After the feeling of experiencing domination magic and knowing that the only thing that awaited Sylvanas was eternal damnation in the Maw, he actually empathized with her. Her actions were wrong, but he still saw the wounded, afraid woman under all the Banshee's bluster, and while it was via different means, we should also remember that she was living under a similar situation to Varian's father all those years ago, as Varian was split into two people, someone with ego, who was bad with money, who was arrogant, and then someone who embodied, yes, many of Varian's great tropes, but also his capacity for having a vicious, warlike nature. Neither Varian was complete, so it seems obvious that Anduin would understand this about Sylvanas. But even with that, Anduin felt he couldn't return to life. He left the throne, turned away from Genn and Bane, as well as everyone he had forged bonds with. He was rumored to be staying in taverns. He was spotted in various locations, but clearly did not want to be found. Then the vision started. Not long after the defense of Emirdrasil, a voice began to call out from the heart of our world, a voice that eventually would drive him to Silithus, where he would meet Thrall and where destiny would step back into his life, setting us up for the World Soul Saga and the new, more grizzled, struggling through his problems Anduin that we see in the key art for the War Within. And with that, we have our one video summary of the story of Anduin. If you've not really known what's been up with this character, if you missed an expansion or two, if you're a newer player to the game, you don't know the old lore from the comics like with Varian Split, I hope today's video has been enjoyable and helped you understand what's going on in the game. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to see some more lore, I think you should check out this one. It's about all the stuff you need to know before we enter the next expansion from a lore perspective, and I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, I'll see you over there. Goodbye.